And we will go live in three, two, one. Welcome, everyone, to the Energy Advisors Podcast. I'm your host, Rex, that Energy Guy. Nice to have you with us today, wherever you're listening in around the world or actually watching. Got a great guest today. We're going to be talking about some of the backside, and I don't mean that in a bad way, the financing sector of renewables, because a lot of people don't understand what's happening there, what's sort of the history, what might be coming up in the future. So, going to be got a great guest with us today. It'll be a great episode. So, anyway, but before we get started, I always want to thank our partners in the show. Without them, can't do this. I mean, I do have other things I have to do. So our friends over at Smart Energy Centers, bringing renewables and all types of energy transition tools on a retail basis, going to do it nationwide. So smartenergycenters.com. Our good friends over at Taxhive. Now, currently, taxes play a big, big role in when people adopt and move forward with renewables because there's lots of programs, rebates, and incentives, both at the federal and local levels. So don't DIY your taxes. It's very important how to do this. Most people don't know that you can roll your tax credits as far forward as 5 years. So our friends at Taxhive, we partner with them. It's a wonderful organization, taxhive.com. And our friends over at Go Green Community Initiative. Uh, this is a great organization. I was part of the founding of this and putting it together. Go Green Community Initiative is 100% focused on helping people get the education without vendor biases, if I could talk today. So if you're looking at going solar or any of the renewables technology, get in touch with them. They'll help you go through a free energy analysis and help you get a roadmap, so to speak, so you can make proper decisions without vendor bias. So anyway, that's what I wanted to thank today. I'm excited about today's guest. It's really exciting what's going on there. And there is a lot of change happening in the industry right now in regards to financing, programs, policy. That's the side of the industry most consumers don't really look at and understand. However, it really makes a big contribution to how we afford these systems because listen, not everybody has, a lot of money piled up to just, go buy a solar system or whatever today. So it's a really big, important process. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest with us today, Andish Alexander. And I'm excited to have him on the program. Good morning, Andish. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you, Rex.
Fantastic. Well, I know you do a lot of things, kind of like me. Once you get the bug in this business, you jump in.
Yep.
So, but before we go there, I want to talk a little bit about you because I have a lot of students that listen to the program. I have a lot of people who might be looking at career changes and those types of things. So let's go back in history a little bit. Now, this doesn't have to be, I was born in 19 whatever, okay?
Mhm.
But I'd like to get a glimpse of maybe some of the things that formed who you are today. So let's go back a little bit. Where did you grow up and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Now, I grew up in Seattle to a mom from Seattle and a dad from Liverpool. And they were just generally environmentalists, before me and my siblings were born. They make their own bread and grow their own vegetables and that sort of thing. Kind of not the absolute hippies, but definitely from that era.
Okay.
And so I definitely grew up with like a general appreciation for environmentalism. But
Hmm.
right, that's before Al Gore, that's before climate change, that's before clean energy. And
Right.
so, it's just like this general feeling that we should respect the earth. And then my parents said that I had to go to college.
Okay.
And so they forced me to go to college. And I said, okay, well, if I have to go to college, then I'm going to study the environment. And then I went to Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington. And there are two tracks you can take. One of them involves math classes, and one of them does not.
Okay.
And so I took the track that did not involve math classes. It was actually that simple as an 18-year-old, right?
Right.
But then the second I started taking classes, I started from the environmental school. I started to realize that we have these very specific challenges, and
Hmm.
they're attached back to not only environmentalism, but just anyone's idea of justice. Like
Right.
a company being able to create a product and make a profit. That sounds great. But if they're doing it with a negative externality that is increasing asthma rates, and I'm someone who was an asthmatic kid, and people
Okay.
do die of asthma, like
Sure.
it is a horrifying experience, and people still lose their children to asthma and being 5 years old and not being able to breathe, those I still can feel those feelings. You know what I mean? And so when I think of environmentalism, I think of that feeling, and I think of families that have pollution caused asthma and not enough money to take care of it. It's that sort of like sense of justice that
Right.
really drives me, because it seems insane that we would live in such a rich country and allow certain companies to not pay for their pollution and not cover the impacts of their pollution, because we're a democracy, and we're supposed to have a government that's set up for us. And so that's why I studied policy in college, but then quickly realized that I need to study economics as well. And then
Right.
that's really where, I'd say it's like the study of the environment is often studying how things got all messed up.
Hmm.
But I like to study economics because that's how we're going to fix it.
Right. Right.
And so, leading into college, just really got that understanding for what is the Clean Air Act? What is the Clean Water Act? What is TSCA, Toxic Substance Control Act? What are these things, and how did we get here till today? And then when I graduated college, I had to go get a job, and I had no idea what sort of job I wanted to get, right? Because I didn't
Right.
have a specific degree, right?
Right.
I was not a plumber or an electrician or an accountant. As I said, when I graduated college, it was mainly just I had the ability to read and write,
Yep.
and that was it. But it was 2009, and I moved to California because I had some family there, and I was also aware of the unique place that California plays in regulation, like being able to set vehicle emission standards separate from the federal government due to the size of their economy. There's precedent for that in environmental law. But then when I got there, I found this brand new solar industry. I found Solar City had just started. Sunrun had just started, Sungevity had just started, and most all the solar companies in the United States of any size were located in San Diego, LA, and mostly San Francisco.
Sure.
And I ended up with a very entry level job at Solar City. And then just grew from there. But that's actually the fascinating thing, because what was happening with Solar City at that time was the creation of the lease.
Okay.
Because, right, solar is policy. We need net metering. We need to be able to be interconnected to the grid. These are all policy, but it's also finance as well. And so
Sure.
that's how I see the solar industry is it's two things. It's policy and finance. And we created the first financed product for solar, which was the lease. And my first job was listening to the early Solar City inside sales team selling that first lease. And yeah, it was amazing to listen to that team just basically go from, you have your utility, you pay your bill, to instead of, hey, spend 50,000, $80,000 on a project, your current cost of electricity is $200 a month. How would you like it to be 150? And that really opened my eyes that solar is a financial product.
Yeah. That's a great point. When I grew up on a ranch in Colorado and have a ranch background, those things, and so even though my grandfather was doing solar in the early 1970s, it was all about money. I
Mhm,
always tell people it's about green. If I'm going to do solar, it's about saving money,
mhm,
type of thing, and avoiding costs. And so, yeah, when I put solar on my home 4 years ago, yeah, everybody wants a cleaner world, but my green that I was really following was the green that goes in my pocket. And so
mhm,
it's really interesting. The further I get into this industry, the different angles that people come at this. And I love when people are jazzed about, cleaner environment and all the things we can do to reduce carbon footprint. But I also understand the real driver for most people is financial.
mhm.
So anyway, so how long were you at your good friends there with Solar City? How long were you with them?
Yeah, I think that was my first job. So I
Yeah.
was out of college. I was 21. I was there for a couple of years. But what happened was Solar City was located about a 1 to 2 hour commute south in Foster City and then later in San Mateo. And I was living in Oakland.
Okay.
And then I saw that there was this other company doing the exact same thing with the same role called Sungevity, and they were a 10-minute bike ride from my apartment in downtown Oakland. And
Nice.
so I switched over there and then did another 2 years at Sungevity. And then just for the viewers, Solar City was started by Pete and Lyndon Rive, which are the cousin of Elon Musk. And so he told them, hey, go start a solar company. Once it gets large enough, I'll buy it. And so he did exactly that. And then Sungevity was started by um, Danny Kennedy, who is still a very popular environmentalist, and then also Andrew Birch, who goes by Birchie, and then he started Open Solar, and then he's involved with things like Solar App Plus and the mandate in California to automate permitting. And so definitely a lot of personalities in the starting of those first leasing solar companies.
Well, that's great because that's really the big genesis. A lot of people don't understand and that's why California has a 12% adoption rate. It's because the industry in the United States was really kind of birthed there, even though there were things going on everywhere else. Okay, fast forward a little bit. Tell us a little bit about where you are today and what you've been up to, and maybe some of the associations you are in and work with, and
Yeah.
help us understand your existing footprint a little bit.
Yeah, so about 10 years ago, I was a solar sales rep in Washington working for A&R Solar. I was one of their first sales reps, and now they're pretty sizable, so it's great to see their development. But in early A&R being a sales rep, we needed good financing. So you have Puget Sound Cooperative Credit Union does a lot of good financing. That'll come in later on the theme of credit unions.
Sure.
And then Verity Credit Union started offering solar lending. And so, and then Generations and First Community created Easy Solar Loan. And so I'm definitely from the world of solar sales that relies on credit unions for the
Sure.
financing. That's pretty much
Okay.
thinking 100% of all the financing I've ever sold. Um, was via the credit unions. And so we have this really, unique and great market here. And so when I was looking for a job almost a year ago now, I ran into the former creator of Easy Solar Loan, Bill Pollan, who was the CEO of those credit unions, First and Generations. Um, and he was saying, hey, I started a new product. I actually reconnected with him at the Solar Washington 2023 Solar Summit.
Okay.
And we were talking about his new product, which is Loan Terra. And so basically, what the product is if you're a credit union, you need to build a solar lending program. You need to build the software, the loan origination system. You need to build up the program, the rules. And for a lot of credit unions, like they really survive off of things like used car loans, but
Yep.
they don't make the used car loan. You
Right.
go to the car lot, you buy the car,
Right.
then the loan just electronically via a system and a separate company and a product then ushers that to credit unions. So when you buy a used car and you get financing, you're using a credit union you've never heard of.
Right.
And so it's that easy. It's that easy for credit unions to make loans, but you
Right.
don't have that with solar. And so that's what Bill Pollan was doing is he was creating Easy Solar Loan. I was one of the people who had used his earlier products, but here comes in the problem. The problem with any one credit union is you are restricted to the asset size that you control.
Right.
And so with Bill Pollan, he kept running into that limit. And so they were acquiring more and more. And I think even after he left, there was another acquisition announced because when you've got a good thing and you're really good at making loans and they're really high quality, high yield loans, you just want to make more and more and more of them. And so it just keeps
Right.
growing. And
Right.
so what Bill and I talked about at the Solar Summit in 2023 was he's like, hey, I got this great new product. And basically credit unions, it's a SaaS product,
Mhm.
software as a service. So credit unions can sign up for free. And they just give us give us their money, and we make solar loans for them. We have the software, we have the program. And I thought, yeah, that's pretty smart. And so from when we talked at the 2023 Solar Summit to me looking for a job several months later, Bill just said, "Hey, looks like a natural fit. I need a solar expert." And then since then, I've just done a ton of education on credit unions, learned about them, talked to a lot of executives, gone to the conferences, and I'm fully convinced that solar needs an ethical source of financing. And due to how credit unions are even incorporated by their charters and by government regulations, they have to be ethical and they have to basically contribute to the financial well-being of individuals and communities that they operate in. And that's a restriction the banks don't have. And so that's what I discovered is that every good solar financing product I've ever used was from a credit union. And then that's what Loan Terra is looking to do is just aggregate the credit unions and bring on an ethical source of financing at the national level that with a product that no single credit union could ever create because they're either restricted to their geography or they're nationally chartered and they're restricted to the amount of cash they have to or
Right.
deposits they have to lend out. And so that's the beauty of Loan Terra is we can just aggregate them, lower the cost of the administration of it, and really accelerate the clean energy transition because, right, it's financing. That's what the transition is fueled off of. And if we
Right.
can get the best and highest version of that product, which is via credit unions, then I think that that's what's really going to benefit the clean energy industry.
Okay, so we're going to come back to a couple of aspects of that because I want to deep dive a little further because you talked about some things about chartering, the rules and laws around all that. But we'll come back to that. Now, what I would like to have you help the listeners understand is sort of what's going on with what would be considered traditional solar financing. Um, in the news right now, it's a topsy-turvy situation. What's happened with those companies? I'm not going to name them because we don't want to call out folks that might be in significant trouble. But there's a lot of issues going on. And I want to talk about that a little bit because
Mhm.
I'm in the same mindset of you is you've got to have organizations that have wider portfolios of loans. Okay. And these companies, the traditional ones that are big in the industry, they're very siloed and they have all their eggs in one basket. And then when interest rates change and things like that, it can be great and it can also be horrific. And we've seen a lot of crashes there. So could you help the listeners understand kind of what is the current state, setting aside what we both believe in is, you know, credit union financing. So could you help our listeners with that?
Yeah, so basically there's four ways to buy a solar project. So we're talking about solar panels that go on your home that interconnect with the utility. You use the energy, exported power goes onto the utility, and then that's called net metering. So
Yeah.
that's your typical setup. If so, I'd say for like solar only, your typical ethically sold project is going to cost like 20 to $30,000.
Right.
If you have the cash, go ahead, buy it. That's great. The other options are also third party ownership. We call that TPO. So that's
Mm-hmm.
PPAs and leases. Purchase power agreement. They're purchasing the power from you, or you're purchasing the power from them at a certain price.
Right.
Leases. Basically, with third party ownership, you're basically renting your roof out to someone to put solar panels on there. And so it's a
Right.
weird little game that's happening there. And I think that third party ownership can be really great. It can solve a lot of problems of the financing and also who owns the O&M, the operations and maintenance and the ongoing maintenance of the system over 25 years. And then the automatic enrolling in certain programs and things like that. So I think third party ownership has a place, and as long as it's done right with the right disclosures and good pricing, it's a totally great product. But it's not necessarily for everyone. And what some people want, especially in places with high utility prices, is they want to own, because ownership is always how you get the biggest financial benefit of a system.
Yep.
And so you want to own, but you don't have the cash. So you take out a loan. And so what's happening in the industry right now, you can Google Connecticut, New Jersey, Minnesota. It's just, CTAG solar. And then you'll see some of the issues. And there are the sales issues not necessarily gonna wade too far into the sales issues. There are, solar consumer protection bills, and even the surprising thing out of some of these lawsuits is they then create state law from the lawsuit.
Right.
Even if the bad actor went bankrupt, they still said, "Well, you did these five things. Those five things are now illegal." And I don't think that that's the best way of creating solar consumer protection law is individual states finding random rules out of individual lawsuits and then pushing that across the state. I think we need to do a little better than that. But what we're looking at with the financing side is you should be able to take out a loan.
Yeah.
That's a normal thing. Um, but what we're seeing is we're seeing hidden dealer fees. Now the problem with hidden dealer fees are the hidden part. Because really it's just like buying points on your mortgage. For
Mm,
anyone who bought a home, they've been offered that choice. I've bought points before on it was like a
sure.
3-year payback and I stayed in my home for 6 years. So the points made a ton of sense to do. But with hidden dealer fees, what they're doing is they're increasing the principal of the loan, but not disclosing it to you. And on
Correct.
one point, I think that's a problem. I think we should
Yep.
be disclosing things. And I think that a state law that requires that disclosure at the installer level sidesteps any sort of federally chartered financial institution and laws that they think do and do not apply to them at the federal and state level. I think it sidesteps that because in the end, the one offering and serving up these financing is the installer. And so the installer is required to show the dealer fee. Now, on the face of it, you're just going to say, yeah, that would be great. Always. That's how we do cars and everything
Yep.
else. That's what we look to. We look to the car industry, other home construction industries, and we say, hey, if they have those rules, similar rules, um, would also be great here. But the thing is that I would say, and everyone else needs to determine for themselves, that dealer fees do not qualify for the 30% federal tax credit.
Correct. That's a very important point.
And so if you haven't been told and you go apply for it, you may get it. And if you get audited, you're going to owe the money back.
That's right.
And so when you're thinking of points, yeah, that's great. Put it into the equation. You can see how it affects things. But when you have dealer fees that are undisclosed, and then you're encouraged to do the wrong thing with the calculation, okay, now you're being served up with a return on investment that isn't quite real. It may actually work out for you, but a more honest legal version of it, in my understanding, is that the dealer fee should be disclosed and then
Hmm.
not included in 30% federal tax credit. And then now maybe that financing option doesn't look as good because what they're doing, right, is they're saying, hey, the current market for your income, your debt to income ratio, um, is going to say that you should get a 7% interest rate. On a 20-year fixed interest rate loan for that principal. And they're saying, but we're going to give you an interest rate of 3%. And you say, that's great, but numbers don't change, magically. They change because, well, they increase the principal so they can decrease the interest. And once again, that is totally fine.
Right.
But if you're calculating the federal tax credit on the hidden dealer fees, then my information says you're doing it incorrectly. And while some people may be getting away with it for a period of time, it seems that the tax law should be clarified and then followed, and it seems like that it's hidden dealer fees that are the problem. And just to be clear, yeah, dealer fees that's totally fine, but when you're hiding them and then
Yeah.
causing someone to file their taxes incorrectly, I think that's a problem. And so we passed that law in Washington State that you can't hide your dealer fees. It's the
Right.
installers that are disclosed, and the financiers just have to deal with that new reality.
Yeah. And so could you extrapolate a little bit? Because of those situations, those are causing the traditional solar financiers some headaches. So could you expand on that a little bit? Because we've seen some pretty big players go out, and there are some that are on the ropes right now. So what are some of those lawsuits that the consumers are coming back to those financiers with?
Yeah, so just to stick straight to publicly disclosed information
Yes,
from the
exactly.
lawsuits, um, you can see in the lawsuits that the hidden dealer fees are a problem,
Hmm.
but also the sales tactics involved are a problem. So in some of those lawsuits, they get into the sales tactics. And this is one thing I wanted to make clear on this point. You know, when I was selling solar before these sort of financial products existed, um, it was really hard to scam someone
Right.
because when you got them to sign a contract, even if it's wildly priced too high, the
Right.
worst that you can get them is on the deposit and then not returning it.
Right.
And then on the inflated price and being stuck with an install. But what happens with hidden dealer fees and the way that this financing is served up, and is why I think it's Connecticut just outlawed sales reps signing up customers on a tablet or on a phone, which I think is silly. But what was happening is when you sign up for the financing and the contract at the same time without reading the contract, then what could cost $20,000, you got locked in for $90,000. And so, on the face of it, that's a problem. But then you're seeing in the lawsuits, this encourages people to do what? It encourages them to kind of do what they need to do to make the sale,
Right.
because from 20 to 90 is $70,000. And who's getting that $70,000? Someone's getting a very large payout. And it's partially the sales rep, but it's also managers and it's also the financing company. And so that's what you're starting to see in these lawsuits is if the sales rep has outright committed fraud, just normal fraud,
Right.
then they're included in the lawsuit.
Right.
If the solar installation company was involved, which they are, then they're included in the lawsuit. And if there were hidden dealer fees that negatively impacted the customer, then the financer is included. And so that's what they're starting to do is they have the sales rep, they have the sales company, they have the installation company and the financer, and they're suing all of them.
Well, and it one of the problems for the consumer is a lot of those sales organizations that sold it to them, and the installers, um, they disappear. I mean, we've seen these
Easily.
interest rates go up. Some states there are estimates that maybe 40 or 50% of the solar sales and installers have gone out of business. So gets left with the liability lawsuit? The financing companies. And
Mhm.
that's what we're starting to see some of these lawn chairs that are folding pretty big because the little guys are gone. You know, the litigation and the lawyers know who to go after for the big fish. And so the finance companies are on the hook. And so I don't want to call the industry a mess, but there's a lot of things that need to be cleaned up. And I'd like to get your opinion on this. I would love to see licensure. Okay. You know,
Mhm.
you wouldn't buy a home from an unlicensed realtor. You wouldn't buy a mortgage for that home from an unlicensed mortgage broker. So, you know, outside of a car purchase these days and your home is a very substantial investment. And, you know, when it boils down to it, it's all of the where the problems are is in financial disclosure. And so, in my opinion, not only do we have to change some policy, but I think we need to get the industry cleaned up to get rid of that deception and how things are sold and through licensure. Because, you know, if we require licensure where people are taught and licensed how to do this, and then there are penalties if you don't follow that, that puts those organizations on the hook. And I kind of like to see what your thoughts around that.
Yeah, so I'm very directly working on solar consumer protection bills. That's one thing I'm focused on right now. I'm looking at the drafts of the ones that are being suggested at the state level, and then also the ones that have passed and was involved in the Washington state process. I don't yet myself, and I'm doing that work now, but I don't yet have clarity for myself to say we should do this to solve this problem. What I am
Mm-hmm.
doing though is I'm talking to a lot of people that are working on this problem, caring about this problem, and going over these different ideas.
Right.
And basically, as I see it, is it's like a series of requirements. You must disclose this information in your contract. You must say this, you must not do this. You know, it's like, so when I look at each and every one of those recommendations, yeah, I'm spending a lot of time talking to people about, you know, what would the effect of that be? Where has that been done? What was the effect there? So when we look at licensure, um, I think that is definitely one way to solve the problem. We've already done it with home sales. I think it would make a ton of sense, but when you look at the details of it, because I'm not yet on one side or the other of that, but when you look at the details of it, that's where I start to see things that I really like. Because the whole point of licensure is one, you have someone to follow up with.
Right.
Yes, that is true. But it's this deeper point that I think is great is in licensure. This is not quality training for you to be a quality sales rep and have all the best terms and moves and tools to close
Right.
the sale. That is not what it is at all. What
No.
it is saying you took a course that
Yes.
outlined what was legal and what was not legal. And so
Correct.
when you do something that was illegal, we have a certificate that says you knew that was illegal. And I really appreciate that. And so, well, I'm not necessarily on one side or the other on we should do licensure.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if we did, that it would be very effective in making sure that sales reps and the companies training them knew that we're not going to get away with this. We're not going to argue. We're not going to split up our companies in a certain way. And I think licensure is certainly one way to do that.
Right. So when I look at licensure, and again, I get on my soapbox a little bit about this. It's not just the sales organizations, okay? It is a three-legged stool. I think that the finance companies should be requiring it because, again, financial disclosure is really the big problem here through the ethics. You've got the installers, and sometimes the installers are the folks that sales too. But I think you need what is one aspect that is attractive about licensure is that if you get everybody bought in, well, then we get rid of a lot of these issues because, hey, I'm not going to grant from a financing company. I'm not going to work with you unless your people are have gone through this accountability and this training. Or the installers, you can work with your sales organization. So it's a way to do that. I guess the biggest problem that exists right now, in my opinion, again, always just my opinion, is I'd rather see the industry come up with this as far as the people who are involved, and helping people own these technologies than policymakers.
Hmm.
Okay, and here's why. Okay,
Yeah.
we're going through a national administration change right now. There's
Hmm.
going to be different people thinking about how we should do policy than what's been over the last 4 years. And every 4 years, we are susceptible to these policy changes. Well, who sits on these committees at the national level? Who is at the Department of Energy ahead of it this year, and those types of things? A lot of times they don't have the experience. They don't understand the industry. What they know is what they read in the papers. I love the old Will Rogers quote. All I know is whatever I read in the papers. And so um, I talk a lot about we need to upgrade the policy, folks, because if I have somebody who isn't really have a depth understanding setting policy, and then that impacts the ecosystem of the financiers and then also the installers and the sales organizations, it can end up being a disaster. And so my dream for this industry would be a collaboration of those within inside it that are creating those requirements for licensure because you don't just want somebody that rolls off the street and 2 weeks ago they were unloading stock at a retailer somewhere. They jump into solar and now they just go do things and end up making tons of money, but they're not helping the consumer. And so
Yeah.
uh, like I
Yeah.
said, it's not the perfect, there's no perfect world, but I think there needs to be a collaboration of it. And I think if these segments of the industry get behind it, we can help the policymakers do the right thing. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the policymakers at the state and federal level, now that we have government programs like Solar for All,
yeah.
now that we have government programs like the billions of dollars that the Biden administration has pushed towards organizations like Inclusive to directly encourage credit unions to start doing solar lending and especially low to moderate income electrification lending,
Yep.
which back to that's what I think it's actually all about is making energy abundant and affordable. And so we're doing that. Um, but now that they have their own programs, Now
Hmm.
that the state governments are putting up so much money and they want and need this to happen, they view consumer protection as really important.
Very.
Before, right, it was just some side industry, a couple people buying solar, it's for rich people, who cares what
Yeah.
happens? But now that they have their own programs and they care, and we even have, state emissions targets where we need more and more solar at a certain rate. Now they're saying, okay, now we need solar consumer protection bills. And so that's actually, yeah, that is one thing I'm working on is looking at the bills and trying to create one that kind of works for everyone. Because if you think about the solar consumer protection bills, what we don't want to do is create rules that make it harder for the for the good people.
Hmm.
While what do the bad actors do? They just sidestep them anyway. And so that's one thing that I'm a part of right now is trying to get the regulations to be appropriate. And so, for example, I would just, in my conversations with people, I would ask, there are some states where licensure might make a ton of sense. Um, Maybe nationally, sure, I'm up for that
Hmm.
debate. But let's also talk about the welcome call, and I think that that does a lot too. When you put licensure and a welcome call together, I think you have high quality people selling things with a confirmation that it was sold correctly.
Right.
But and one in some states may come before the other one, but I am a big fan of making digital records of things
Yep.
because now we can one, identify that that is actually that person, that they are actually saying yes to this project, that they're actually saying yes to all the disclosures, and that they are actually aware of what was in their financing product. And so I think that that is another thing that I am seeing in state bills that
Yeah.
I'm having a conversation about that, hey, it actually looks like we should be doing welcome calls.
No, I agree with you 100%. And it's both sides of the equation at that point in time. You're protecting the consumer, and you're also protecting the ecosystem of those who, installers and financial know, because it's very important. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges that are happening. We're seeing this above. Let's go back and drill down just a little bit more on the credit unions and some of the differentiators there. And I'd like to also address, and part of that is, you know, what is some of the regulations around localization, national charters, stuff like that, because I'm with you. We don't go today in most cases and work with a lender that only does one thing for general loans. Okay. It makes things very susceptible to issues in the economy. So let's drill back down, if you could, and let's talk about some of the advantages of using, the credit unions and the advantages that they bring to the table.
Yeah. So I would say the first advantage, well, let's get into the advantage in a second, but to be clear, because I've been a member of a credit union since 2008 when Washington Mutual went under during the financial crisis because I didn't want to
Yep.
go to Chase Bank. And I was told that it was a more ethical choice. But then I haven't really thought about it again since then.
Mm-hmm.
And so then in doing this, really doubled down on, what credit unions are. So just to be clear to everyone, credit unions, they basically, if you look up the history, it's very direct. I'm not just being like a
Sure. Yeah.
rock and roll punk, stick it to the man sort of thing. But like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
literally what happened was in the 1800s, in the Industrial Revolution, banks did not want to do normal consumer retail lending. They did
Right.
not. And so you had all these people with money under their mattress. And that's why they had money under their mattress because the bank is like, no, no, thanks. I don't believe in you. I don't believe in creating products for you. I am not in the public interest. That's not what they do. They don't,
That's right.
they're not there to take care of you in any way. And you can know how I feel about banks from there. But with credit unions, what they were it was actually things like textile workers out of Germany in the 1800s, but in America where it really actually took off after being established was the Model T Ford. When we started to do cars direct to consumer, once again the banks didn't want to create those loans, and so that's a lot of the growth of the credit union industry was making new auto loans. Okay,
Yeah.
now what happened after that became a profitable industry? Banks took over. So what do credit unions do now? Used car lending, because who doesn't want to do used car lending? Banks. So it's this very interesting kind of play between them. But then with credit unions, they choose a group. like firefighters in Chicago, and then they say, okay, so that was the original, we're going to support them. Oh, we're going to support their family members. Okay, we're going to support anyone that lives within the jurisdiction. And
Right.
so with credit unions, they're all over the place as far as their geography or the type of person they're allowed to work in. But over time, they've become larger and larger and larger to encompassing their community. And then you also have federal charters as well. And so on a federal charter, once you get to that point, geography is blown open. There's a lot of credit unions that you can join. I'm a part of Boeing Employee Credit Union, and all I need to do is be a Washington State resident. I don't need to be any. I do have family members that work at Boeing, but there's you don't need to have any sort of connection there. And so
Right.
for credit unions, they they one are attached to that member base. But
Hmm.
then two, they have all these restrictions on how they can operate. And so they
Right.
cannot operate like an investment bank. But
Hmm.
what that also means is that when it comes to solar lending, only 5% of credit unions are in the solar lending industry, and the
Right.
majority of those are buying loan participation agreements, which is like the mortgage-backed securities of 2008, which is what is that? It's a portfolio of junk. And you
Right.
don't know it's junk until you've got it, because
Right.
all those bad things that we're talking about that happen in the solar industry that deteriorates someone's ability to pay back the full loan on time over the course of the loan. And so
Hmm.
that's what you don't want in your portfolio. And so that's why credit unions, in my opinion, should be making solar loans directly that go on their own books.
Right.
And so the other thing about credit unions is they don't have the desire and they don't have the ability to pursue high profit margin products. And on one level, you're like, well, why are we hampering them? Well, on the other level, you're thinking, yeah, because they exist for the public interest. They exist for your interest. They exist to help you, not make money, not help their shareholders. They exist to help you. And so that's why they operate at, I would call it not quite credit union language, but very low profit margins. That's
Right.
why, you want a used car loan from a credit union who is not going to inflate the price of that loan, as opposed to someone else who's going to do a much higher rate. And so that's really how I think of credit unions is they are the stable, now we can say ethical, but they are the stable source of financing for consumers in America, and they
Right.
just haven't entered the home electrification industry yet.
Yeah, it's interesting because my knowledge of that, like you said, it's a very small percentage, 5%, right? And there's over 4,500 credit unions in the United States.
With over
So
two
this is
billion, billion, with over $2 trillion on the balance sheets.
wow. So this is a big growth area, I think, that's going to happen. And the other thing that's nice, in my opinion, for the consumer, most credit unions have been around a long time and they're community outreach organizations. I can remember my first experience with a credit union. I worked for a company that doesn't exist anymore in tech. It was Storage Tech. It was bought by Sun, which was bought by Oracle. We had our own credit union. And it
Mhm.
was nice because there were special benefits as an employee that I got for through the credit union just because they now, of course, their charter grew and they served more in the community and then they merged and stuff there. But, there's credit unions for all different types of companies. It's not just the labor union type, organizations. You said Boeing and, there's a ton of them out there.
Mhm.
So, okay, help us understand the difference between the localized and the national charter because a lot of people may not understand that.
Well, I would say that that's something I'm not the biggest expert in, but the
Okay.
impact to us is that on a national charter, just anyone in the nation, there's no restrictions. They can just sign up. And so, if I contact Southwest Louisiana Credit Union from Seattle, Washington, I can't become a member. But if I contacted, let's say, I'm gonna maybe not be fully accurate in this, but PenFed, the Pentagon Federal Credit Union,
Hmm.
they'd probably let me in because they're federally chartered. So that's just the difference. But also with credit unions, there are associations that they can sign up for that
Mhm.
do allow them to have any member anywhere or make any loan anywhere. So not trying to do too much of a commercial for Loan Terra, but that's what Loan Terra does when we bring in credit unions is we say,
Mhm.
yeah, we can do geographic decision making to push loans in your area that you already exist in, but we can to you, but we can also help you get a part of the right association so that you could be a credit union in Southwest Louisiana making loans in Kentucky. You just need to be have the right association signed up for.
Yeah, because work with there's a credit union. Again, I don't have any affiliation with them. I'm not being sponsored by them. But as an example, there is a group out of Boulder, Colorado, that is the Clean Energy Credit Union, and they
Mhm.
have a national charter. And
Mhm. Yeah.
all they do is do lending
Yeah.
for renewables and that, from what I understand, that's growing, right? There are credit unions that are focused around renewables and solar, right?
Oh, sure, there are, and that's where we come from. Is we come
Yeah,
from a credit union that's where all the growth was coming from.
yeah,
But you run out of funds, and then you need to acquire more, and then you run out of those funds. And so I would say, the way that I look at competition is my competition are bad loans and inaction, where the
right.
inaction is sticking with your utility. My friends are the ones making ethical, no dealer fee lending, and so I do see a lot of credit unions that have their own solar programs. I see them as friends. We're working together. We're innovating together, but
Hmm.
also if a credit union does have a program, they could literally adopt our product too.
Okay.
And so in the end, they could be a customer. So yeah, I would view those credit unions as those are our friends. Those are if I'm at a convention, I want to go hang out with them and have a beer. Those are my friends.
Okay. So, well, there's no shame here in talking about what a company does. I have people on because of what they do. So let's pretend that Mr. Rex here, brand new consumer looking at a solar loan. Um, in working with Loan Terra, do I engage you guys or do I engage the credit union? What's the landscape? What's that workflow look like?
Yeah, so since we're a startup and we're expanding, in the end we'll be everywhere. So
Right.
do either of those things and you'll find your way to us. But what we're doing right now is we're signing up individual credit unions for their area and then getting those installers hooked up because I've been the manager of a solar company. You're open to all the different financing options. You're open to looking at them all. Then the good installers that I like credit union loans, and then they'll say yes to more of those products. And so we've already, had letters of intent signed by solar installers that just say, yeah, when you turn that product on, I will bring it to the next customer that signs up with me. And so that's what we like about it is that the demand is there, the path to customers is just there. But we also think that home electrification is kind of the better thing than just the solar focus. I think there's some consumer
Yeah.
protection there.
Yeah.
I think this is already happening to your home, so you might as well be in control. And in the end, we will also do kind of like you spoke about earlier, a direct electrification plan. Then you can get financing approved, and then you can buy the solar, which is exactly how home mortgage happens. Is you get
Exactly.
educated, and then
Right.
you get it pre-approved. Then you go
Right.
look at things that you have approval on. So that's what we're trying to recreate. But the credit union that signs up, they can put a poster in their window. They can do a social media post and say we do solar lending, and then it will go through our software. So in the end, we'll be going in and helping create that kind of the right version of the demand.
Hmm.
But all the demand is right there at the installers it's happening. And the installers, the ones that I talk to, the ones that I have LOIs signed with, they
Hmm.
all want more volume and more options of zero dealer fee, direct interest rate, no cooking the numbers, solar loans. It's like, you can't really in the end want more than honesty, which is,
Hmm.
in my opinion, a no fee, no point, no deal, fixed interest rate because it's just honest. You're going to pay this interest rate over this time, and it's not going to change.
Well, one of the things I try not to get on the soapbox all the time, but it's pretty easy to see coming out of tech. You look at these innovation cycles and how things are adopted. I won't get on the soapbox of the technology adoption life cycle, but
I'm living it.
the thing that I think people, when you talk about electrification of your home, okay, it's a lot of different things. Okay.
Mhm.
And there's so many new innovations of technology. So if you look the average age of a US single family home, so not the people, but the
The home.
structure itself is 40 years. Okay.
Mhm.
And if you're going to electrify and get to a home that's more efficient, there's a lot of technology that you're going to need to consider because as things evolve, things get better and better and better. So it's not just that I've got generation capabilities, there's more efficiencies like heat pumps and smart homes and smart breakers and all that stuff. And then also conservation technologies. Way cool new stuff going on with phase change materials, etc. So working with some of the analysts that we've been doing, some of the big companies, kind of looking at like a 10-year run of a period when people can fully electrify their homes. Now, hopefully, we'll see prices come down so that can go faster. But I think the world is going to be looking at, hey, it's not just solar. It might be solar. It might be micro wind turbines. It might be heat pumps. It'll be better water heating systems, all kinds of things. So I think what people need to be as consumers looking for is who's that local partner that I can work with that can help me through all of this electrification, energy transition, whatever terms. And I think that as kind of what we've talked today, sorry to get on the soapbox, everyone, is that it's going to be better to have that localized relationship with somebody who really fully understands that than just some big bank that is, focused on one particular.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And that's what has changed in the last about 4 years is people used to come to me and say, I want to go solar, tell me about it, try to sell me solar. And then it was, okay, well, what about batteries too? But
Yeah,
now people come to me because I don't sell solar right now. And if they mention solar, but also heat pumps will bring them to me.
yeah,
And then some of them will just literally say, okay, I've heard about this home electrification thing. What's going on here? And so for the past couple of years, just on the side, I've helped the people that I know build an electrification plan
yeah,
and then do it. And they love it because I went from saying like, oh, you should get solar for all these reasons to let's just look at your home and this is what makes sense for you, given
right.
what you said about yourself. And then they're like, wow, I had to update these things anyway. Now I'm doing it in a way that leverages the incentives the most, sets me up for a better future. And yes, this is how I think humans work. You hit all those personal notes. I benefited myself in all these ways. But then I also benefited society, and now I feel better about it. But
Right.
the whole selling solar the other way doesn't
Yeah.
really work. I've been a solar sales rep for years. I've sold over 300 systems. Like that's not why the majority of them bought. And so, yeah, I think home electrification, making a plan. There's, solar companies are becoming electrification companies. Solar nonprofits like Rewiring America are actually electrification nonprofits.
Yeah.
And I think that there's increasing resources out there. And I think most of the solar industry is moving in the home electrification
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, we're going to see a lot of consolidation in those industries, HVAC, solar, all that kind of stuff. It's going to come together. The handwriting's on the wall. It has to be.
Solar
So,
companies should be heat pump companies, by the way. That's like I've been saying that to solar company. That was before I was aware of electrification. I was telling
yeah,
solar companies, why are you not a heat pump company? Just from a business internal efficiency with leads and
yeah,
closing, already in the middle of it. It's amazing that they don't all already do it because you can do the electrical work yourself and
yeah,
then sub out the actual refrigerant work. And so there's like a ton of reasons why solar
yeah.
companies are mostly becoming heat pump companies too.
Well, what's interesting, if you look at all the technologies to electrify your home and the the adoption rates of it, the only one that has double-digit adoption rates across the industry is heat pumps.
Mhm.
People don't know that. Well, that's because when your furnace dies, well, that's the time people look at that. Okay. And the reason why they don't pay attention is you can't see the heat pump from the street. So when you're driving down your neighborhood and you see panels on people's street, you don't realize that it's almost double the amount of adoption rate of heat pumps. So
Mhm.
again, it's all come together. We could sing these songs for lots of times because we're both on that same page. But no, I think there's a very interesting time to be in this industry. It impacts everybody. Okay. Um, so I think it guys like you who are working on policy, helping with financing, and again, I think what's going to have to take for adoption rates to get higher, because the United States is nowhere near countries like Australia and New Zealand who have mid 30% adoption rates. And then you start to look at some of the innovative programs with VPP, so virtual power plants, and subscribing to community solar. There's a lot of options out there. And the old days of solar is I got one solved problem, I got one solution, and everything hits in that. Well, it depends on your use cases. So any thoughts on what you see? Because you've been a guy in this industry on other than the stuff that we talked about, trends that you think that are going to come to bear?
Yeah, I think when you think of the electrification of the United States, a couple things to be aware of is it's mostly a state policy movement. And so when you think of who's pushing that forward, it's often state solar associations. And so that's my focus for the next 4 years are state. Now they're called solar and storage associations. They're all switching their name. I
Mm-hmm.
think that next step would be electrification.
Yeah, I think that's the names need to go to. But hey, I'm a little guy, so yeah.
But you do have organizations like Electrify Oregon. So you do have organizations, nonprofits that are going in that direction. Because, you know, if in the end what we want to do is yes, protect the environment, but benefit the humans, then electrification does it. So if you just think about heat pumps, I live in the Northwest where everyone has gas heat.
Mhm.
Well, a couple of things are missing from that equation when it comes to HVAC. One is they don't have cooling. And so growing up, a 90-degree day was just an anomaly. I've experienced 110 up here in the Northwest.
Oh.
Um, I had to go to at the time, my elderly father and get a portable AC unit and go be in his house for a couple of days just so that he didn't overheat, So it's like those sorts of like drop everything and keep your family members alive because of heat happening in the Northwest in
Yeah,
Seattle. That's
yeah.
crazy. That's craziness. And so what my mom did this year is she got a heat pump and she got it from a company called Ballard Natural Gas. And I was like, yes, their name is literally Ballard Natural Gas. And they convinced her to install a heat pump because I've been telling her about a heat pump.
Yeah,
Because we also did solar and we also did a span smart panel. So she's slowly electrifying her home. But it was actually Ballard Natural Gas that convinced her that this is the right time to do it. And so if you think of a heat pump, it's heating. It's cooling,
yeah,
but what we also have increasing in the Northwest are these days where it's 90 plus degrees out, but there's also so much forest fire nearby that it's unsafe to breathe the air. But then closing all of your windows and doors on a 90-degree day where the air is seeping into the house anyway, is not a solution. And so when you have a heat pump, well, what a heat pump does is it's not an air exchange unit. It's a heat exchange unit. And so it's taking air from inside the house,
right.
putting it through the unit, taking the heat out of it, dumping the heat outside, cooling, and then blowing that cool air into your home so that when there is that hot day with all that forest fire smoke, you're inside in a healthy home. I'm an asthmatic, I need that. And so that's why when you think of what do people need, they need heat pumps. But then
Right.
once they have heat pumps, what do they need? On-site generation to
That's
reduce the
right.
load. Well, now they're exporting all at the same time, which is the duck curve. So what do they need? They need batteries within time of use and VPP programs to put that excess generation on the grid at the right time. But then also you want to decrease the usage of your home at that time. And so that's why smart controls make sense. And so when you just think about the future of an electrified, decarbonized home, and
Hmm.
then you bring in the electric vehicle, and now you're creating your own power, and it's all for a lower operating cost because of these utility programs. We're creating a better version of the world. And
We
I
are.
go from trying to convince people to buy solar to
Right.
letting them know that this is a beneficial inevitability and they should probably take control of that process. And that's when you get people kind of really excited about it.
Right.
And I think a lot of the arguments that would be against it fall away, and people realize that we're just reorganizing society in a better way.
Yeah, and then the other thing too that I think is going to be continue to be a big driver in this industry is the instability of the grid and the enormous demand for power generation. More and more items are being electrified. I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, did you ever think about a battery powered lawnmower? No, I mean, it wasn't something that's on the horizon. Most of my kids are got to the point where they got their own places now. They bought battery powered lawnmowers. I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. All right, maybe I need to get one of those. So I think for a lot of people, for me, that was one of the things I was looking for is okay, yeah, I still need the power company, but there's going to be those times where I can sleep a little better at night because not only creating my own electricity, but I've got some independence. So if something burps that in the system, that I'm okay. I can keep my perishable items cold or frozen, regardless of what's happening with the local utility.
Yep.
So I
Yeah,
think that's going to
but
be another big driver.
there's a couple of big things that are happening there, which is it's not just PG&E in California who is saying that I need to turn off the grid when it gets too hot, which was
Right.
it getting more and more hot, so they're happening more
Yep.
and more. But other utilities are saying that too, and I had that moment where my response was, so you're saying that I am in a monopoly and you don't have an obligation to keep me turned on.
Yeah.
Whoa, like I thought they were under obligation to keep my lights on. They're not. And
No.
so I think that that is a big revelation. And I think that's another really important part of the movement. And really, it's also saying to utilities, we want to be a partner here. I
Yeah.
want to own the equipment, and I want programs where I can own the equipment, and I want to be fairly compensated in those
Right.
programs. That's another thing that I work on the side. I joined a group called the DER Task Force Seattle, and what we're working on, I'm leading up a valuation group that basically just says of all these programs where the utility uses your equipment and then
Hmm.
compensates you financially for that, what should that financial compensation be? And not because one, advocating for the consumer, but prices are incentives, they guide behavior. If the utilities are offering enough for these VPP, these demand response programs, they're going to have a larger uptake. It's going to be better for the grid. But here's another thing about the grid. We don't have one national grid.
No.
We have
No.
a bunch of smaller grids, and
That are
then we have
connected.
a bunch of smaller pieces. They're like
Right.
Legos,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so you can't just take power from Washington and send it to California. You can't just, there's not like a little thing that
Right.
you can just turn on and then all of a sudden we're pushing hydro to California to solve their problems. Physically, that doesn't exist. You can't do that. Then when you
No.
look at Western Washington, where I am, we can't go to Eastern Washington for power. We can't go to Idaho. We can't go to Oregon. Can't go
No.
to Canada. They actually need power from us. And so, like in Western Washington, it is going, we are going to need more power generated in Western Washington. Okay.
Right.
So, one, we're talking about electrification is already happening. Two, decarbonization is also happening. Those are slightly two different things. You can
Two
have
different
electrification
things.
without
Yeah.
decarbonization. And so you're thinking, oh, we're doing it just for the environment. No, we're actually
Hmm.
doing it because it's a better way to organize our economy, but it creates some new challenges that we need to then solve. But in the new kicker is that the tech industry has shown up and said, we need to cover the world in data centers
That's right.
because of AI.
Yep.
And we need clean energy to power it. And you have,
Right.
whether it's we need more nuclear, we need more this, we need more that. Like they need an abundant, clean source of energy in the middle of nowhere to power them. And they are literally saying that if we don't hurry up and create more power generation in
Yep.
Western Washington, located physically in Western Washington, then we will cease to serve the business needs of the biggest companies in our local economy.
Yeah. I was at a conference and Eli Musk was speaking, and he was speaking about the fact, and I've done a ton of research on this. The power demand that AI is creating is unparalleled, and it is also almost out of control. If you go out on anywhere on the internet and look for a piece of software, everybody has an AI component. Okay. Everything does, just because it makes sense. And that's just software. in a single AI query. Okay, so ChatGPT, write me a country western song that's sad and talks about my dog. That eats as much electricity as your refrigerator does in one whole day. So the demand is unbelievable.
Mhm.
And so you're seeing it from tech, you're seeing it all over the place. AI is going to be used at even microprocessor level of devices and things like this within vehicles and those types of things. So the transaction is just unbelievable. So that demand is just going to be crazy. So I think that's also an unknown, but a very big portion of the industry as we go forward. So anyway, love that we've been able to connect today, and love what you're doing. We need more people that understand that it's not just climate, or it's not just this or that. This is a whole integrated way. And I want to come back to a point that we talked about, the instability of the grid. I'll give an example that I talked to many people about. Here in Colorado in January of 2021, we had that terrible fire that was set. It was the Marshall Fire, wiped out 1,100 homes, businesses, everything. I mean, it was a big, big fire. Well, it was caused because the winds were so high that a power line went down. It struck the ground, created the fire. So in April of this last year, 24, all of a sudden we get this notification that your power is going to be shut down to prevent fires. Okay. Nobody would have ever thought of that before. Well, on a purposeful shutdown, it took them 4 days to get the electricity back to all the consumers. And that was just 55,000 resident customers. So it wasn't, but it was schools, it was businesses, it was everything. And so as we have more and more extreme weather events, issues with things like that, the stability factors isn't just because we've got too many EVs charging or things like that. There are so many parts of that ecosystem. You see it in the coasts with the extreme hurricanes and things like that. I just think people need to be looking ahead a little bit and protect themselves, because it's not just one thing that's going to cause grid instability or uncertainty.
Yeah, well, if you think about the grid, it's really old.
Yep.
It's past its prime.
Yep.
And for myself, whenever I have a piece of infrastructure that needs to be redone, um, I think about modernizing it. And so
Yep.
that's like with the grid, I don't know that people are purposefully making the argument, but maybe accidentally making the argument that we need to spend trillions of dollars
I
on
do.
keeping the grid exactly as it is. And that's insane to me. If we're going to spend billions and trillions of dollars on the grid just to maintain the current abilities, we
Uh,
should definitely be spending that money in a different way to advance the grid, to operate in a new way with VPPs, with microgrids, with DERs and distributed generation, because it will cost the same amount and
exactly.
it will bring lower
Exactly.
cost and more stability. And so I think that people are accidentally making the argument that we should not upgrade the grid, because when you can look at the Pew Research Center, when they ask the general population about clean energy and even the federal government's role in pushing it forward, 70% of the population says we need clean energy. It should happen now, and the federal government should help make it happen. And I think what a lot of them maybe don't realize, they are advocating for grid policy, which
Yeah.
is actually a giant fight right now. Maybe
Huge.
a good fight, but it's a giant fight right now. And when you look into it, it's so confusing. Like I personally need to spend a lot more time understanding federal grid policy, because there are some very kind of minutia of decision making that is then unlocking or locking away the ability to update the grid. And so it's definitely a very, very important time for the clean energy transition, because it's just starting to kick off. But to make it happen, you have to dive into finance, federal
Right.
grid policy. Like, it's amazing how many things you need to learn about. And for myself, yeah, I'm definitely trying to choose maybe several, maybe a lot, but choosing several of those topics and just diving in and trying to advocate for them, so that we can get a better version of our economy, which is, I think, why
Yeah.
70% of Americans want this, because they understand that the clean energy transition, electrification, and decarbonization is a better version of our economy.
I'll close my side of this out. we need to rethink things a little bit. Okay. My mother, who's 82 years old, she rode a horse to school. Okay. She's out in Nebraska and she actually rode a horse to school all the way up through high school. Well, I love horses, but I'm not going to ride one to work. Okay. So we need to rethink things of, okay, if you think or this is what the public needs to understand, if you think things are going to stay the way they are in 10 years from now, you're crazy. And so
No,
let's stop thinking about riding horses to work. Okay. Because
no,
that's the mentality we have to fix is it's just not going to continue to be this way. I mean, I think there, we could talk about all the business models that have changed thanks to technology and all those types of stuff, but really, you're really right about it's a better way to build our world. So that's my side so far. Well, listen, it's been great to have you on the program today. Um, Real quick, give out the website for your folks' organization and anything else how people might want to get in touch with you.
yeah, LoanTerra.com is our website. I'm the only one in America with the name Andish Alexander, so I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. And
Okay.
I usually typically find and talk to in over the phone, over a video call, a new person either in the solar industry every week or someone that wants to get into the solar industry. And so I'm very open for new connections.
Fantastic. Well, I will not let you get away without my last question. I ask this of all my guests, okay? And hopefully they're not prepared for it. Okay, so in life, we have this concept of a bucket list, things I want to do before my time is through, right? Well, in science, there's always an opposite of something. So instead of having a bucket list, there's this other list that's rhymes with bucket, starts with an F, okay? But this is a family show. So it's that F it list, okay? What might be one thing that's on your F it list that you're like, I have no interest in ever doing this. So I'll give you an example. I hate snakes. Snakes and me, no. If you put me in an environment like the Indiana Jones where he goes down and there's all those snakes, I would absolutely lose my mind. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what might be one thing that's on Amish's um, effort list?
Yeah. I like to break through barriers of myself. Like, I have a slight fear of heights, and so I actually like to rock climb. And
Okay.
like my whole body will start shaking as I'm rock climbing, which is not good for rock climbing.
No,
And so that made it onto my bucket list, and so I enjoy rock climbing. But on my effort list is large expanses of water. Like people are like, let's go on a cruise, and I'm like, no, maybe not really. I don't know
yeah,
what it is. Maybe it was being an asthmatic and having an asthma attack in a swimming pool. Maybe it was the movie Titanic came out when I was a kid, but like there's nothing about large expanses of water that I want to be any bit near.
that's the first time I've heard that. So, that's awesome. So, anyway,
That's actually a
so,
specific fear. There's a word for that phobia. I forget it though.
well, it's beyond my head for sure. So, anyway, it's been great to have you on. I want to thank you for taking the time investing it. Love what you're doing. We need more people like you. Okay, folks, we're going to call that a wrap for today's episode. I want to thank you for listening in. The podcast is always available on almost all the podcasting platforms and on YouTube. And if you are on those platforms, don't forget to like and follow and set the notifications. We always appreciate that. And so I will say today what I always say when wrapping up any episode: thanks and make it a great day.